Let us pray. God of the universe, we give you thanks for giving us another day. We ask your blessing upon our nation. Bless the work of the members of this house. May they work diligently to bring about solutions to the pressing issues of these times. Bless all men and women across our country, especially those who work in the service of others. We offer special prayers this time for the police. May all that is done this day be for your greater honor and glory, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
This House is in session. Minutes for the meeting held on Tuesday, May 25th, 2021 to be confirmed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be confirmed.
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby confirmed.
Announcements by Your Honor, the Speaker. Messages from Her Excellency, the Governor General. Petitions, papers.
Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I am commanded to lay the audited financial statements of the Newton Business Park Project Company Limited for the financial years ended March 30th, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, and 2014. And also, Mr. Speaker, the annual report of the Barbados Investment and Development Corporation for the financial year April 1st, 2018 to March 31st, 2019. I'm also commanded to lay the audited financial statements of the Board of Management of the Parkinson Memorial School for the financial year ended 31st of March 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012.
Government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, subsection 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of the day sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day sitting. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day sitting.
Government business, sir.
Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 2. In the name of the Honourable Minister of Energy, Small Business and Entrepreneurship, to move the second reading of the Grantley Adams International Airport Transfer of Management and Vesting of Assets Amendment Bill 2021.
Honourable Member for St. James Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, our purpose here today is to amend the Grantley Adams International Airport Transfer of Management and Vesting of Assets Bill, which is at Chapter 286 of the Laws of Barbados, and to provide for Grantley Adams International Airport to contract with licensed operators in relation, sir, to management and also in relation to maintenance of the airport, the aerodrome itself, and the satellite installations of the airport, and to provide for all related matters. And Mr. Speaker, sir, that perhaps captures in legal terms that which is the purpose for us being here today, but I think that it is very necessary to understand that in a real sense, we are not just making arrangements for management and maintenance of the airport, sir, but setting the tone for us to speak as a country a lot more sensibly to the need for us to embrace the idea of the visitor economy. It goes without saying, sir, that the tourism and hospitality sector is the biggest contributor to the creation of foreign exchange earning opportunities in Barbados. And that has been so for several decades. And government, sir, genuinely feels that if we are to realize the maximum potential of that sector, and I accept that right now the sector is on bended knee due to the COVID-19 circumstance, but it will recover. And undoubtedly, when it recovers, we must be positioning ourselves as early as now to be able to maximize the potential returns that can be offered by that sector. And therefore, sir, to do that, we have to broaden our understanding and our approach to hospitality in Barbados with a view to better embracing, as I said, the idea of what is a visitor economy. And by a visitor economy, Mr. Speaker, sir, we're speaking about the use of the hospitality-related industries and, of course, those satellite endeavors, those things which are distinctly Barbadian, like Barbadian culture, for example, Mr. Speaker, sir, but in a way that harnesses foreign exchange earning opportunity so that those people who come to Barbados participate in whatever pursuit they participate in, but they're doing so, Mr. Speaker, in a way that is encouraging them to spend. And one of the things that perhaps we have understated in Barbados is the importance of spend. We want visitor spend. The numbers game, and I said this when I was Minister of International Transport and Tourism, the numbers game is all well and good. I have sat in this place, sir, nigh 20 years. And the reality is that I have heard several successive ministers of tourism speak to the language of arrivals. It means nothing if you are not also speaking at the same time to visitor spend. Because visitor spend is what drives employment. Visitor spend is what drives business development in Barbados. Visitor spend is what, quite frankly, sir, where government derives its revenue returns from. And it is therefore on the basis of visitor spend that we are able to plow far more back into the country in terms of developing other things that we must do in this journey of national improvement. And you can go on and on, Mr. Speaker. It is a self-evident proposition. You can't, without foreign exchange, have the necessary inputs into doing the road work that you need to do in Barbados. You can't, without earning your foreign exchange, Mr. Speaker, sir, be able to source all of the computers and other things that the Ministry of Education must be able to do in order to make sure that we look after our young people. We can't, Mr. Speaker, so without having the foreign exchange, be able to do the things we need to do in sports development in Barbados, the lighting of our playing fields, building more facilities, etc. It goes on and on and on. And the principal foreign exchange earner, sir, continues to be, as we look into the future, the tourism sector. And even as we diversify the economy, and for example, place a greater degree of emphasis on energy and investment in the energy sector, largely speaking, sir, it is a sector that is going to be saving the country foreign exchange as opposed to earning the country foreign exchange. And we have to be able to pay our bills in the international world without going cap in hand to continuously borrow. And so therefore, sir, this piece of legislation goes a little bit further than at first blush might appear when we talk about transferring the management and vesting of the assets of Grantley Adams International Airport and looking after the maintenance of the airport. It was early in the life of this administration, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the government reached out to the International Finance Corporation with a view to securing their technical advice, their professional expertise, and their wealth of experience in matters relating to public-private partnerships, which could be forged so as to ensure that we were able to expand the Grantley Adams International Airport, make it, sir, a more modern aerodrome, more fit for purpose, and, Mr. Speaker, sir, engage in substantial work which was needed at that time, and quite frankly still is, with respect to maintenance of the structure. And our intention at that time, Mr. Speaker, sir, was to make sure that we were able to do so within the context of a concessionary structure, which simply means that we would make the airport available for private sector operation when once a private entity was able to satisfy by way of a bidding approach open to the whole world to participate in, satisfy the government of Barbados that this particular bidder was the best possible bid to be able to spend whatever the set sum of money would have been over a certain period of time to do the necessary redevelopment of the airport. And by extension, Mr. Speaker, sir, that person would have an opportunity to have a return on his investment over a period that would have been set. At the time when we had the initial discussions, we were looking at 30 years. And, sir, therefore, they have a return on their investment. And we see some substantial improvements to the airport, and we get an opportunity for the airport to be a far more commercially viable and effective operation, thus creating opportunities for there to be new business endeavors led by Barbadians in Grantley Adams International Airport, that the airport would, via those business endeavors, be able to spawn more employment, and therefore there is a greater demand for labor at the airport on a full-time basis, and that, quite frankly, we make it fit for purpose in terms of its capacity to meet the demand of international travel. And all of that, sir, obviously was important and continues still to be, but nonetheless was impacted to some degree by COVID-19. Now, having said that, that is a mouthful. And the question would obviously be asked, well, who is the IFC, the International Finance Corporation? The International Finance Corporation, sir, is really the private sector arm of the World Bank. As an affiliate of the World Bank Group, it was founded in 1956 and is the largest single development institution in the world. Now, sir, what is the focus that we were asking them to bring to bear? We wanted, sir, them to assist us in the promotion and the support of private sector growth in this country, specifically at the point of the Grantley Adams International Airport, via a number of activities that we wanted to be able to bring on stream. And we know that this has been their area of expertise across the developing world. Their record of experience, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that they have touched over 100 countries globally in terms of this type of developmental assistance. They are to be found, Mr. Speaker, or their footprint has been found in Asia and in the Pacific, in Africa, widely, most specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, in Latin America, Mr. Speaker, sir, and in the Caribbean. Specifically with regard to the question of airport development experience, and I'm taking my time to go through this specifically because I want for the not only those within earshot of my voice outside of this house, sir, but within this house, most particularly the leader of the opposition, to understand clearly the policy formulation of the government. With respect to airport development expertise, the IFC, sir, was integral to the development of Aimé Césaire International Airport in Martinique, of Luis Munoz Marin International Airport in Puerto Rico, Mr. Speaker, sir, in Linden Pindling International in the Bahamas, again, and at Norman Manley, and also at Sangster International in Jamaica. So their experience in the Caribbean is wide, and their expertise in the matters of airport development is also very wide. Now, sir, it is important for us to understand a guiding principle in all of this. I have to say at the outset that air transport is the principal mode, obviously, for connectivity, supporting the tourism sector. The main pillar of the Barbados economy, as I said before, sir, is the tourism sector. Yes, it is suffering some difficulties now, but rebound it must, and it will be inevitable that it does. And it is also vital, sir, for us to recognize that we cannot effectively have an international business sector without also having the Grantley Adams International Airport being fit for purpose. And indeed, most other sectors, as we've come to recognize through COVID, tend to feed off to a large extent of the tourism sector in Barbados. And so therefore, the stronger and more vibrant we make that sector, the easier it is for us to go about the business of diversifying the economy that we want to diversify, and at the same time strengthening those other areas of the economy that we need to strengthen. Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, as much as we speak the language of caring, it takes cash to care. And the cash cow, sir, continues to be the tourism sector. So that is all of the restructuring and diversification and all those things that theoretically sound nice, when we get down to the nuts and bolts of what we have to do, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is going ultimately to be led by the tourism sector in this country. And therefore, I come to the question of what is the mischief that we had to seek to correct when once we decided that we were going to go to the International Finance Corporation to secure their professional expertise and technical assistance, because we felt that there were some fundamental improvements that needed to be made. So specifically, sir, in 2018 May, when we came to this place and assumed the reins of administration of the country, we recognized that in terms, first of all, of the infrastructure issues at Grantley Adams International Airport, there was a severe concern. Both terminals, the arrivals and departure terminals, were cramped for space and were suffering challenges with congestion and capacity constraints. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to be as candid with the House as I can be. The last major rehabilitation on Grantley Adams International Airport's terminals would have been done during the period 2004 to 2006. And it was at that time, and I must direct your attention, sir, to that which I recognize by looking at your eye you are already thinking about. That is that once again, the Labour Party, a Barbados Labour Party administration, had to reach in and do fundamental work in order to make sure that the fundamental nuts and bolts of the Barbados economy continue to be able to function effectively and efficiently. That work that had been done in 2004, 2006, sir, was done under a Labour Party administration. The arrival hall, for example, having been reconfigured at that time, was built out to what at that stage was a carrying capacity of 1,500 people at peak time. And it was felt then that this was well and good to serve the people of Barbados. However, Mr. Speaker, sir, but by 2019, we were seeing figures in this country of an arrival hall that at peak time was carrying 2,100 people, having been built out to carry a maximum of 1,500 people back in 2004, 2006, Mr. Speaker. Now, in fact, I could go a little bit further. I recall well in January of 2019, when in that month alone we would have had 71,000 visitors come to Barbados. And if you do the average, sir, over 31 days, you'll be seeing that if there'll be a pass-through of that arrivals hall of around 2,300 persons per day. And let us face the reality, it isn't a full day. You don't have that taking place from 6 a.m. until midnight. We all know that when those planes literally start to drop out of the sky, it is between 2 a.m. and 5 or so in the afternoon. So between a 3-hour, 4-hour period at maximum, p.m., 2 p.m., 5 p.m., during that 3-hour window, and if one come late, it might run a little bit longer. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, that on any given day during the month of January of 2019, you would have been seeing about 2,300 people coming through that arrivals hall, and the planes one behind the other, and you understand the congestion. Now, Mr. Speaker, that therefore created, and the history is known. There were long lines snaking through the airport terminal, so in some cases almost right back out to the aircraft itself, and it was Barbados's airport, sir, like any other airport in the world, is your first impression, and it is also your last impression of the place you live in. And if your first impression is that you come to enjoy a vacation, but your experience is that you wait for 4 hours before you can get out the airport, you begin on the worst possible note. And that is what we had to contend with. So the first issue, Mr. Speaker, sir, was of infrastructural challenges of that nature. The second one was with capacity on the parking apron. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, that there has been a continuous rise in traffic because the attractiveness of the destination is without doubt. That is why I can stand here, sir, and say with confidence and conviction that when once the world returns to a semblance of normality, Barbados will once again return to that semblance of normality with regard to our tourism enterprise. What we must not do is to be resting on our laurels all like now, but rather we must be doing this type of business that brings us here today so as to make sure that we can advance the development of key pieces of the tourism product and tourism package in Barbados. Now, in terms of parking, it is a fact that at what we call the regional gate, LIAC Gate 9, Mr. Speaker, sir, as it was then called, there would have been some instances where you have one of those aircraft parked immediately behind another, and then a third behind that. So you got triple parking at that gate. You have seen it, I have no doubt, Mr. Speaker, sir. Later on in that year, in the year 2018, American Airlines, because we, again, increased the opportunity to access Barbados by creating a new gateway in Carolina. We had situations where the demand from American Airlines was so great that they could not properly fit aircraft at the 10, 11, 12, gate 13 because there was no capacity for them, given scheduling, to come in at that time and take out passengers at that time. And so they too had to start to use gate 9. But the construction, the configurement of gate 9, in 2004-06, when it was created, it was intended, sir, to house about 600 odd passengers. I beg your pardon, sir. It was intended to house less than 100 passengers. By the time we had gotten to 2019, it was housing 600 passengers. And so therefore, it was impossible for that gate to be functioning effectively. And therefore, we had, Mr. Speaker, sir, to again go through the process of trying to treat to that challenge. Again, another issue that confronted the country and where we have also to continue to place our emphasis is in making sure that we are as accessible to all travelers as is humanly possible. One of the difficulties that people do not necessarily understand up front is that perhaps more than any other category of individual, persons with disabilities are traveling. And that doesn't necessarily mean only persons who are born with a disability or who have had a bad accident. It also means persons who've gotten to a mature stage in life and advancing years makes it very difficult for them to stand or whatever for long periods of time. But the fact of the matter is they have done a lifetime of living and a lifetime of earning, and they want to spend a little bit of money as part of the so-called bucket list. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, it cannot be good and appropriate that in the latter stages of that decade, we were still lifting people down an aircraft stairs in a wheelchair. The Caribbean Aircraft Handling, sir, had to create a special reconfiguration of the flight kitchen containers so as to be able to air condition it, put in windows, etc., and lift persons with wheelchairs up to the level of the wide-bodied aircraft. And again, that ability to adequately take care of persons with disabilities was another challenge facing the airport. Not to mention, of course, the fact that we all know that when we go through the airport, you hardly ever saw any specialized seating for persons with disabilities. All the seats were the same, as though all passengers were created equal. And persons with disabilities, therefore, in terms of restroom facilities and in terms of seating facilities, were not adequately dealt with. Now, Mr. Speaker, it is important for us to recognize that we cannot anchor economic recovery and growth around that sector unless we recognize also that tourism investment has to be accompanied by global best practices and best standards. And the Prime Minister of Barbados made it very clear that those were going to be the ambitions of this government. And yes, COVID has impacted us. Yes, COVID has slowed the process down, but COVID has not derailed the ambition. And that is the reason why we are here today, because we continue to be on a pathway towards making these commitments that we gave to the people of Barbados right. An assessment of the traffic performance, Mr. Speaker, sir, would indicate that in the year 2017, there would have been 2.1 million people arriving in Barbados. The target that we had set for ourselves, sir, was to get to by the year 2024 to 3.1 million people. Now, there obviously going to have to be a rethinking of that because of COVID, but you understand the level of ambition that the government has and the seriousness within which we take, therefore, the need for the airport to be able to carry the kind of capacity that it has to carry. Equally, 7,000 hotel rooms exist in Barbados, and the thinking is that by the year 2024, we should be at a position where we can say they had 10,000 hotel rooms. The last time we had Test cricket here with England, the fact of the matter is that there was one night when Virgin Atlantic had some challenges and was not able to fly, and people had been already boarded on the aircraft, and those who came in had taken up their hotel room space, and there was a challenge of finding room for 200 odd people because the island was completely full. That is the way in which business was being done prior to COVID, Mr. Speaker, sir, and it is to that we intend to return. But we cannot get there unless we do the kind of investment that we need to do in order to make sure that we have that kind of capacity. The other area, sir, is perhaps the most important one of all, and it is the area that I began on when I spoke to this House just now, sir, about embracing the idea of a visitor economy. We cannot, Mr. Speaker, sir, seriously look at the Grantley Adams International Airport as being separate and distinct from all other airports in the world. Airports now are being governed by certain standards of assessment. The concerns that people have about the airport is that it must be able to perform independently. I made the point, sir, that if you look at the global picture, it is believed that on average, 50% at least, of an airport's revenue should come from what is called non-aeronautical revenue. Aeronautical revenue relates to the landing fees, it relates to the fuel charges, it relates to the passenger taxes, etc. But non-aeronautical revenue relates to those things that are independent of those charges that we apply to the aircraft. It is the way in which the airport drives commerce and creates commercial opportunity which yields revenue. It is a failing and has been a failing in Barbados for too long. It is not the first time I've said that in this House of Assembly. Mr. Speaker, sir, in Asia and the Pacific, the average for non-aeronautical revenue earning is at 60% of the airport's receipts. In the United States of America, the average for non-aeronautical revenue earning, those commercial endeavors, is at 55% of what the airports receive. Mr. Speaker, sir, in the year 2018, when we came to government, Barbados was looking at 23% of what the airport received being non-aeronautical revenue. It meant, therefore, that we were not adequately taking care of the opportunities to encourage those people who came through the airport to spend on memorabilia, to spend on food, to spend on experiences within the airport, to treat ourselves, Mr. Speaker, sir, as though we were a serious set of people, not forever being anchored to the hope that a government can step in and save us, but that we can earn our own way. Most importantly, Mr. Speaker, sir, it meant that there were not enough entrepreneurial activity, there was not enough entrepreneurs and enough entrepreneurial activity at the Grantley Adams International Airport, and that, as we all know, for far too long, the airport, sir, had excluded the average Barbadian. The honourable member, the honourable leader of the House needs to turn off her microphone. That the airport had excluded the average Barbadian from access so as to be able to earn and employ fellow Barbadians on those premises. I say that again. For far too long, our airport, the island's sole airport, had under successive administrations throughout the course of this country's history excluded ordinary Barbadians from the opportunity to earn and to employ fellow Barbadians, fellow citizens at that airport. And Mr. Speaker, sir, that has to be corrected. Now, there's obviously one other consideration of significance that comes to mind, and that is that there was also an issue of national security. Because as you know, sir, when you were going to St. Lucia, or if you're going anywhere in the Eastern Caribbean to practice, and I know that you do that, you, sir, would have had to go down to Gate 9 in order to take one of the regional flights to get to wherever you're going. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is almost without doubt that you would have had to cross between those people on your way down to Gate 9, having cleared immigration. You got to cross those people who are coming up, who are entering Barbados. Or at the point where there is the airside courtyard, you walk into a line of other persons, sir, who are going elsewhere, perhaps also to the arrival hall, etc. So you had the commingling of passengers who are entering the country and those who are leaving the country, something that ought not to happen anywhere in the world, especially since 9/11. And we had to find all sorts of creative means with a line, and then we put in a little piece of perspex and so on and so forth. But Mr. Speaker, sir, it was a makeshift situation which you can do for a short period of time, but you should not be doing in 2019 and in 2018 when the rules set after 9/11 were set. Sir, 9/11 was in 2001. So it doesn't reflect well on us at all. And the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, that beyond that, there's also a need for us to be candid about a few things. We need to put in place appropriate service level contracts with some of the entities that help serve the airport and make it functional. There has to be a proper service level contract with customs. There has to be a proper service level contract with immigration, with port health, so that we are able to say, sir, with certainty that on any given day, these are the amount of staff that must be at work. And that works for customs and port health, and it works for the airport management, so that they can manage and exercise with certainty those responsibilities that must be exercised. It equally is true to say that we had to come to a point where we are able to gauge the time that a passenger takes between getting off the aircraft and getting his luggage, the time that a passenger takes to get out of the terminal, because you want, Mr. Speaker, sir, to be able to accord and align yourself with international best practices. We need, sir, to be able to do those things, but we cannot do those things if we are functioning in an ad hoc situation where, depending on what's happening at any given point of the week, you may have X amount of staff or not reach that level. You may have an arbitrary decision that buys going to get taken off of a belt and put on the ground, and dogs come and do the sniffing and that kind of thing. Nobody's saying that these things should not be done, but there has to be a framework within which they're done so as to minimize the passenger inconvenience and minimize the reputational damage that is caused to the airport and to the country as you do these things. Because every country in the world is doing it, but that don't mean that you do it in a way that is not connecting with the service, the hospitality industry, the best practices that must be in place. And our difficulty in Barbados is that we did these things, but not doing them in a way that accorded with the best practices of the hospitality sector and indeed, sir, of the industry itself around the world. So that our national concerns, sir, as I've just outlined, I've taken the trouble to outline them because I know how it is in Barbados. We forget very quickly. And I would hear, but why it is that you need to bother with these people? You need to bother with these people because they bring a certain level of expertise, a certain level of professional experience in helping not only countries in the Caribbean, but countries all around the world in order to shape the way forward on these particular matters. And I hope that satisfies the critics. It also, sir, is important to recognize that those national concerns that I've just alluded to align well with industrial trends. Studies of airport development over the last 30 years, sir, show that there have been changes from state-led operation to private sector operation across the world. Barbados, and I want to say this for the record, because it is very important, again, that we take time and speak to people in the clearest possible terms so as not to allow any opportunity for there to be misinterpretation or willful misrepresentation. The effort that this government is seeking to put in place with the International Finance Corporation so as to advance the expansion and refurbishment of Grantley Adams International Airport is in no way related to any sale of the airport. The airport is not being sold. There's no intention. There's no interest in sale. The airport, Mr. Speaker, sir, is to be expanded, and it is to be managed over a concession period, which will be set in terms of time, and then after that, it reverts to the government and people of Barbados. Fact of the matter is that the work that needs to be done is outside of the reach of the government of Barbados at this point. Fact of the matter is that we cannot, however, rest on laurels and say, well, boy, we can't raise that money, so you can't do nothing. Because you have to do something. And you have to do something because you're talking about a sector that is vitally important to the well-being of the people of the country. And therefore, as the government, we have to make the hard decisions and say, are we going to go ahead with it or not despite COVID? And the answer is yes, we go ahead with it in spite of COVID because it is in the best possible interest of the people of Barbados and the country's future development. And of course, the development of the tourism sector, which is exceptionally important. So Grantley Adams International Airport will continue to be state-owned and it will be privately operated. The airport development costs, Mr. Speaker, sir, around the world are substantially recurring costs. They outstrip the capacity of the public sector in most countries to be able to finance it. And that is not only so of small island developing states, that is so, sir, of the largest industrial countries around the world. Globally, airports are becoming more self-funding, and there is a widening range of commercial considerations, which we all know exist, and which are annexed to the airport operation. And we have in Barbados now to dare to invest in and to have the ambition to be bigger, invest in being bigger and better, and have the ambition to go there, and to go there without fear. Why is it, sir, that you can have airport hotels in the Caribbean, but you cannot have one in Barbados? Why is it? It is a form of revenue that can come about as a result, sir, of its proximity to the airport. Why is it, sir, that we have vehicle rental centers now all around the world? But a vehicle rental center, bringing all of your vehicle rental people together at the Grantley Adams International Airport, is the hardest thing to achieve. Why is it, Mr. Speaker, sir, that there are airports which are also offering conference facilities? Why is it, Mr. Speaker, sir, that airport concession shopping mall experiences? I invite anybody to tell me who has been to New York, who has been to England. You ain't got to go far, Miami. Mr. Speaker, sir, the shopping mall experience is there. It is about food options. You're telling me in a country that is now sold around the world as being a culinary capital, that the same people, sir, can't be in the airport providing food options? Are you going to say that to me, sir? Is that not the time that has come? You're going to tell me, Mr. Speaker, sir, that people in a country where you can make dresses that Rihanna model and the whole world seeking to find the young lady who made the dress, that in Barbados those dresses could not be sold in a reopened Grantley Adams International Airport in a shopping experience, Mr. Speaker, sir? Is that what you're going to tell me? The reality is, sir, to unleash the potential of the Barbadian people, and that is the way in which this government sees the development of the airport. Equally, it is very clear that our sights are also set on maintenance and repair opportunities for aviation at the airport. And why, Mr. Speaker, sir? Because we have a few hangars there for the housing of aircraft. We want, sir, to attract more because we are a hub in the Caribbean. We are, Mr. Speaker, sir, a transatlantic stop on the way to Africa. We are a transatlantic and refueling stop, sir, for Africa. We are a transatlantic stop on the way, sir, to certain parts of Latin America. And we feel, sir, that we are geographically positioned to be able to do substantial logistical work, again, out of the airport. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, again, it is time for us to unleash the potential of the people of the country. The fact of the matter is that the government's purse cannot do all of these things and at the same time be able to fix all the schools that rotten down during the last decade of the Democratic Labour Party misrepresentation. As recently as this morning, I had to have an exchange with the Minister of Education on some of the challenges that are faced on simple matters that government got to find money to fix. Bathrooms in school, Mr. Speaker, sir. You know, these are things that we still grappling with because of years of neglect. And the fact is, sir, that the opportunity must now be given in a reformatted and refurbished and restructured usage of the whole aerodrome of the airport in order for Barbadians, sir, who have the capacity to be there, sir, in doing the maintenance and repair. And what are some of the things that maintenance and repair operations around the world do? Let me tell you, sir, so how you can understand how successive administrations have shut out and excluded our own people. People who fix in, Mr. Speaker, sir, radio equipment and upgrading it. Not a man at Grantley Adams Airport is employed doing that. But there are people around Barbados who can do it. Mr. Speaker, sir, people who do repair on the instruments of the aircraft. Not a fella at Grantley Adams International Airport doing that on an aircraft, but they got people in Barbados who do that professionally. Maintaining, Mr. Speaker, sir, the inside of the cabin, fixing seats and tables and things. Mr. Speaker, we got people do upholstery in Barbados, though. Not a fella employed at Grantley Adams Airport doing that. But people skilled here in this country. And you can go on and on, Mr. Speaker, sir. Welding, repair, plating, doing work on the engines, the propellers, etc., Mr. Speaker, sir. Look, especially for those small frame aircraft. I ain't tell you go ahead do it on a big 747, But the reality is, within the competence of the people of Barbados, we can do it for several of the small aircraft in this region, saving people in this region hundreds of thousands, if not perhaps millions of dollars in sending aircraft overseas to be fixed elsewhere. And that is the type of thinking that we have to be prepared to bring to bear. I mentioned logistics, sir, and that is also a very important part of the thing, because we'll be using the geography of Barbados in order to make sure that we are able better to handle the shipment and transshipment, especially, sir, of things which might be specialized goods and therefore need to be handled in a certain manner. And a story that I will not go into right now with regard to lithium, I think you call it lithium, what kind of battery is it? Lithium batteries, lithium-ion batteries, comes to mind. But you know, Mr. Speaker, it is perhaps the saddest part of this story that it took till now for a government to come to this place to speak to the people of this country in this way with regard to opportunities to empower and to employ themselves. It took until now. And that is perhaps the saddest part of this story, because none of the things that I just enumerated start in the world yesterday or didn't exist in the world 10 years ago, Mr. Speaker, sir. It was that there was no appetite or interest in doing it then. And I want to say to you, sir, that, you know, as I speak to you, aircraft registries come to mind. And that is another area. You know, if you go to Aruba, Mr. Speaker, sir, you see that the aircraft registry is linked to the international business sector over there. They're a country that don't pay any corporation tax. They don't have any of the tax structures that we have in Barbados. But you know what they do, Mr. Speaker, sir? They raise their revenue through the aircraft, because they've made themselves so attractive to foreign investment that then the people come down with the private planes and you register the plane. The plane is registered where the owners are based, and that's the pull. And so for $15,000 US for every plane, that's the registration per year. Malta also does it, but Malta takes a different route. And Malta puts in place special tax rates for people involved in the aviation sector. And that's how they attract it via the human resource product that is there. But in whatever route you take, the point is we are building out opportunities, not only for employment, but for further capacity in terms of human resources in this country. And that, sir, needs to happen, and needs to happen badly at the island's major port in the country. Pardon? Sorry, it needs badly to happen at the island's airport. So, sir, where are we now? The project, sir, is now in its second phase of the preparation, and that is we had settled in January of 2020 on a structure to the transaction. But, sir, along comes a fella called COVID-19, having mercy on nobody anywhere in the world. And therefore, the transaction that we contemplated having cannot now be had in the same way, because of the very obvious reason that COVID has impacted the financial model that everything rested on. And what was the financial model? The financial model was, sir, that if you look at 71,000 passengers coming to the island, let's say in January of 2019, you compare to 2020, that dropped to 62,000 by 2020. And then by 2021, Mr. Speaker, sir, we are down to 4,000. Let me get that again. From 70,000 in 2019, 62,000 in 2020, down to 4,000. The source markets that we deal with, the major source markets, where we draw all the traffic from, in January, when it's winter cold, then people could go nowhere. They're in lockdown in their second wave, in some cases the third or fourth wave of COVID. And Barbados, sir, has to deal with that 95% or more fall off in traffic to the island. So obviously, the model that you're looking at in terms of footfall through the airport, the traffic you're bringing in, that can't work the same way. Again, sir, January to March 2019, we would have seen arrivals in the vicinity of 210,000 passengers between January and March 2019. That, sir, fell off to 159,000 in 2020, and for the 3 months in question in this year, Mr. Speaker, sir, a total of 7,400 passengers. Again, a 90-something% decline. It is unbelievable. But the reality is that the structure of the transaction that one is planning has to be fundamentally revisited, because you're modeling it on the basis of, you're telling a man, come and invest here in our airport, spend millions of dollars, help us build up capacity. Your return on investment is that because there's so much traffic coming through, you're going to see the business, and therefore your cut in the process is going to be significant. Guaranteed. Right now, sir, that can't be said to anybody. So therefore, you have to relook the whole thing again. It is easy, I think, to be a critic. It is unfortunate, I have said, to come to this place purely armed with the fresh criticism of the day. But we are at the point now, Mr. Speaker, sir, at the midterm of the life of the government, where the rubber is starting to meet the road. And it is now time for those people who speak with a critical tone and look at everything with a jaundiced eye to now share with the country what they would do if confronted with the same circumstances in the same way, Mr. Speaker. You can't just luxuriate almost as though you are in a hammock of convenience so that you say that which is critical for the opportunity to be heard. It is now time to submit yourself to the intellectual test of saying what you would do and how you would treat to these circumstances. I don't hear that from the priestly figure who has now entered the fray in an issue that really and truly I quite frankly pay no attention to over in the George Street camp. I don't hear that from him, nor do I hear it from the lady who was lost in the wilderness over in the George Street camp. And I most unfortunately don't hear it from he who is paid as the holder of constitutional office in this country, in this house, who should also be called upon to share with us what he would do if he were confronted with these set of circumstances. Would you or would you not continue with the proposed improvements at Grantley Adams International Airport? Do you agree that there's a need for the improvements at Grantley Adams International Airport? Is it merited? What is your view on the future of the tourism product of the country without those improvements, Mr. Speaker, sir? These are the taxing questions that those who want to rush into public life must be asked to speak to. You can't only be here, as I said, to luxuriate in a hammock of convenience and criticize the government with whatever criticism comes your way today, engaging your mouth without the benefit of thought because it is the thing to do to catch a headline on the news. The rubber got to meet the road now, though. And Mr. Speaker, sir, we have looked at the situation, and we say that even in spite of where we are now, even in spite of the fact that at this moment, as I stand before you, Mr. Speaker, sir, parts of Canada are still on lockdown. As I stand before you, Mr. Speaker, sir, the reality is that the protocols governing COVID-19 in that major source market, Canada, are most unhelpful. Because if you travel abroad, you still got to go back home, and as you get home, you must spend 3 days at your own expense in a government institution. In a government institution, it ain't to say that you're going in a villa or none so, at your own expense, $1,500 a day, Canadian. And then after that, you got to be at home in quarantine for 2 weeks. Those are the protocols today. And in spite of all of that, we say, sir, that we have confidence in this country and in this country's economy and in this country's tourism product that it can rebound and that it must be given every support it can get so that when once the world is past this and the vaccines are taken by the vast majority, as I hope will happen. As recently as this morning, I see that Moderna is talking about vaccines for 5-year-old children. Hallelujah to that. I hear that Sir Pfizer and others are coming with their own vaccine for children as well and teenagers. Hallelujah to that. The more they can get vaccine, sir, the better it is for all of us together in the world. Don't mind all the fake news. I hear people talking the fake news, and then Then the same people I see on WhatsApp, they forget that you see the name on WhatsApp. Man, I ain't with a vaccine. But then pushing down people to get in the polyclinic ahead of the elderly. They ain't about no vaccine, but pushing down people, old people, to get in through the polyclinic door, Mr. Speaker, sir. Because it is the convenient thing. You again, they luxuriate in this hammock of convenience where you do say anything that comes to mind, but then you go and break for yourself. Can't work. It really can't work. And the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we've had to engage continuously in discussions over the last 6 months or so, and we can confirm that the shareholder government, the government of Barbados, in the interest of the people of Barbados, sir, will proceed on the basis of a restructured transaction agreement on this project. I've said why it has to be restructured. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, the actual definitive nature of the final transaction will come to Cabinet, but that is not a matter that we are going to hold up the show about. We are coming here, sir, because there is ongoing work that has to be done even while we await that final transaction to be settled, or structure of the transaction. The International Finance Corporation, as part of their professional services, provided us with 4 studies, 4 complete detailed studies. One was a legal due diligence study. One was an environmental assessment of what the impact of this new thing would be on the airport. And quite frankly, sir, it looks into matters of substantial environmental detail, up to including the ability to deal with waste disposal and so on. Mr. Speaker, sir, there was also the social report. And again, because there are going to be a wide variety, potential of new businesses, etc., you have to look at how it impacts proximate neighborhoods and so on and so forth. Fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, the legal due diligence report made it very clear that there were some issues which are relevant to the successful implementation of the project. It looked also broadly at the air transport sector and the fiscal framework and already existing contracts which are at the airport. So you have to look at things like labor relations. You have to look at the obligations under the new concession. You have to look, Mr. Speaker, sir, at any legal risks that might arise and how are you going to take steps to mitigate them. As I say, you've got to do a little bit of intellectual heavy lifting now. The rubber has to start to meet the road. It is no longer just about the politics of convenience where you get up and you say, I ain't in that, I find fault with that, I can nitpick at that. You need now to present to the country substantive issues and substantive solutions. And arising from that legal due diligence practice, Mr. Speaker, it was recognized that the legislative amendments that we bring to you today were necessary for Grantley Adams International Airport to be able to transfer the management of its assets, and also by extension, sir, to make some adjustments to the civil aviation aerodrome certification. And I'm going to go into the reasons why these things became necessary. First of all, Mr. Speaker, it was important for us to be able to permit uninterrupted operations at Grantley Adams International Airport on the transfer of the management and the operations of the airport to an approved licensed operator. When once you have identified an operator, sir, and you are going to place in the hands of that operator the management of the country's sole airport operations, you have to be sure that that operator is going to be able to do so in a way that does not lead to any collapse of or disconnectivity in the essential services provided at the airport. It was important for us to make sure we got that first step right. Equally, you have to be able to ensure that you permit uninterrupted operations by Grantley Adams International at the end of the 30-year period of the concession. So that what happens at the end? At the end, it reverts to the government, and operations of the airport revert to the government, with the option of the government to say, well, boy, and I don't think any of us will be here 30 years from now, but well, boy, you know, as we look at it, those 30 years work well, we're going to put this back out again. Or alternatively, you say, Skipper, to be honest with you, this is something that we may need to reconsider and revert to business as usual. Or for all we know, there may be a new model that comes up. in the space of the next 30 years. But equally, Mr. Speaker, sir, at the end of it, you have to have some clarity of purpose. And equally, there will be an operating licensee, a person who or entity who is operating the airport. But we can't go blindly into the good night because we in government do not enjoy the luxury of the hammock of convenience. We in government, sir, do not enjoy the luxury of just sitting there and saying, you should do this, or you could do that. We have to be clear, clarity of purpose. And part of the clarity of purpose, Mr. Speaker, sir, means anticipating what could happen. So if you give a third party, for the first time in the history of Barbados, an operating license at Grantley Adams International Airport, you have equally to be sure and sure-footed about what happens if the operating licensee breaches the conditions of his license. How do you ensure that in dealing with that situation, you do not, by extension, cause a collapse in the airport's operation? Because it isn't open for a responsible government to say, oh, Lord, hey, how that could happen, though? Well, look at my crosses. That is for those people who are making casual and convenient conversation outside the rum shop, on the call-in program. Those places where you can speak without having the benefit first of prior preparation, thought, and planning. We don't enjoy that luxury, sir. Ours is a far more difficult task. And therefore, part of what this legislation speaks to is how you treat to those matters. Equally, sir, it is necessary to permit Gaia to be able to retain its license with relation to the arrangements concluded with the International Air Transport Association, IATA. Because IATA, Mr. Speaker, sir, is effectively the trade union of all of the airlines. And all of the airlines that come here, sir, have an arrangement in which we put our hand in their pocket and tell them you have to pay to the government some passenger service charges. Now, we have to make sure that there's a proper way of managing that because the Crown still needs the passenger service charges. Equally, Mr. Speaker, sir, we can't just leave it to chance that they will be handed over. So you have to put those arrangements in place. I know a lot of things were left to chance in the decade that now gone. And we have to make sure, sir, that there's a different level of management. So I know that this is not the type of bill that is easy for the leader of the opposition to have to respond to, but it is a bill that will tax him, and I believe he is able to rise to the challenge. I hope he is. But it's a bill that will tax him because this is one of those occasions, sir, where we are speaking to the country about the well-being of the country in the context of the policies that are being implemented in difficult times, and what would you do if you don't agree? That's what we need to hear. And how you would treat to these matters if you don't agree. Beyond that, Mr. Speaker, sir, there are obviously some additional concerns that have to be looked at, and I will do so briefly. There's a necessity for Gaia to be able, sir, to effect a lease or a sublease to any other entity where that entity qualifies as a licensed operator. And that is important because the licensed operator is coming with nothing in his hand but money and know-how. He has to prove his financial ability, he has to prove his technical experience, and so on. But having done that, we must now make provision for the aerodrome which we own to be able to be accessed by him, and the lands of the aerodrome to be able to be accessed by him, and indeed by third parties who he may choose to sublet to, because of the fact that there has got to be a mushrooming of commercial opportunity, entrepreneurial opportunity, business development allied to and aligned with the air transport sector in Barbados. And I went through some of those things just now, which we have to be able to be prepared now to look at as a country. Gaia is also going to need to be able to transfer part or all of its operations to another entity, as I said, for a time-specific period. And in the window of the transaction discussions, in terms of time, we were looking at 30 years being the life of the transaction. The transaction structure is now being rediscussed So I don't want to commit to the house the period of time. I commit only to one thing. Let there be no ignorant talk about sale, because Grantley Adams International Airport is not for sale. But there has to be a period of time within which a transaction is able to be done and completed, investment made, and the person making the investment has to have the benefit of a return of his investment, on his investment. An existing aerodrome certificate is going to have to be transferred to a new entity, either in whole or in part. The aerodrome certificate is that legal document required by the Federal Aviation Authority, in particular, to run the airport and to operate the airport, to manage people's commercial flights, etc., etc. Deal with matters of air safety, deal with all the legal requirements aligned to air transportation. That certificate is a critical operational document for the airport. That has to be able to be transferred. There's no legal provision in Barbados now for it to be done. We're here today to create that provision so that there can be a third-party operation of the airport. And such transfer, Mr. Speaker, sir, for the benefit of doubt, is subject to a few things. First of all, the right of reversion of the transferred operation to Grantley Adams International Airport. That's the first thing. So that once you get the operation certificate as a third party coming to operate the airport, understand that at all times there is a right for the certificate to revert back to Grantley Adams. And that means, simply put, it ain't for sale, it ain't yours, you have it for a period of time, subject to the conditions imposed on you by the state, which must stand in a position where they say to you, we are satisfied or we are dissatisfied. And then you can call back for what is yours, which is the license. The second thing is, Mr. Speaker, sir, that where there's a termination of the rights of the licensed operator to carry on the transferred operations, and the airport, Grantley Adams International Airport company, exercises its right to step in because they're dissatisfied, and they say, look, we are not happy with you, we're not happy with how you're doing this, we are going to step in and we are going to transfer the operations back to us. Any transfer or lease of any property or any assets or any rights are automatically voided, and everything reverts to the status quo ante. Legal term for the way things were before. So if you, Mr. Speaker, sir, are the licensed operator, and I am Grantley Adams International Airport, Inc., a holding company, and I say to you, I am satisfied with you, Mr. Speaker, sir, and I'm giving you this license to operate. But 3 years down the road, I am immensely dissatisfied with how you are functioning. You have breached conditions. You're not up to the standards that we consider to be suitable as the holding company having oversight, and the shareholder, which is the government, saying, look, this can't work any longer. Then I call back for the license. And yes, there may be some other contracts that you've entered into during the 3 years. There may be some rights that have accrued to you during the 3 years of your operation, Mr. Speaker, sir. There may be some assets or property that you have managed to acquire. But the fact of the matter is that everything reverts back to the way it was at the beginning, in the interest, sir, of the protection of the state and the state's interests. If it is a matter of property settlement, then we deal with that in the ordinary terms that we always deal with property settlement. I think I have made myself clear. And Mr. Speaker, sir, that is how it has to go forward. Now, those are what we come here to pass today. So that even as we settle the numbers with regard to the transaction figures, we are putting in place the framework legally that will allow for us to get on with the business in the interest of the people of the country, Mr. Speaker, sir, because this is not a government that is struck to the point where it can do nothing and achieve nothing just because there is a COVID-19 pandemic in the world. We have a very optimistic view of the recovery, and the discussions thus far suggest that looking all at the vaccinations that are taking place around the world, most particularly in the key source markets, England is doing well, Canada is beginning to improve its level of vaccination, the United States substantially improved during the life of the new administration. We are thinking, Mr. Speaker, sir, albeit optimistically at this stage, that a fourth quarter of 2021 should start to see significant strides towards recovery. It is anticipated that by 2023. As a best case scenario, we should be able to return to the 2019 levels of arrivals that I have already referred to. We anticipate by 2023 in a best case scenario. On current projections, a worst case scenario would be 2025. Well, again, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is easy to stand here and look at circumstances in a snapshot of time today, but it is also important that I say, for the benefit of the country, that it is a snapshot of a picture of where we are today. We do not know with certainty what will happen because there are so many variables in this pandemic, and it has really been a learning and ever-changing experience from day one. The commitment of the government, Mr. Speaker, sir, is to anchor this process around aviation development. As I said, business opportunities, logistics hub. This is where the government is interested in going in the future. And I think, sir, that there is every good reason to believe that that is a sound and wise approach. There is no intention to change either the ownership structure of Grantley Adams International Airport or the level of labor at Grantley Adams International Airport. And let me say that again. There is no intention to change either the ownership structure, the state continues to be the owner, or the level of labor. I know that I will hear that, as always happens, people come in and they look for efficiencies. And that may well be true. It may well be that you may find that you have a baggage handler or two too many. It is equally true that if you create a shopping experience, you may find that you now need to have 5 or 6 more people in any 1 square, 2 or 3, 10 square feet of space at the airport because of the fact that you need people to man the shop. Equally, if you're going to have more culinary experiences, you're going to need to have more people because you need to have people dealing with the culinary side of the thing. And the more attractions that you put in, the more things they are to do, Mr. Speaker, sir, the more employment levels will probably rise rather than be negatively impacted. And I say that only because I know the rhythm of this house. And I know what I am likely to hear. So I take in front before in front take me. But it's true. It's true. Mr. Speaker, sir, the security and the priorities that I want to speak to very briefly, sir. Obviously, we are looking at revenue generation. I have said from the very beginning, sir, that there is a need to embrace the idea of the visitor economy in full. And Grantley Adams International Airport is perhaps the best and most succinct example. There are several others, but that is a very succinct example of how we have done business in the same way for a long time without looking at the way in which you can drive visitor spend out of the hospitality experience. And the priorities we have, sir, obviously are built out around revenue generation. The investments will probably begin in the context of buildings and capacity because it is that broadened capacity in the arrival hall, that widened capacity in the departures, sir, that allow for there to be more revenue generation by virtue of the fact that the bigger the hall is, the more people it can carry, the more experiences you can put into it in terms of culinary, in terms of shopping mall, et cetera, and therefore, sir, the more people that can be employed, and that is how you drive your revenue as the first priority. The second priority, Mr. Speaker, sir, is to look at issues relating to security and the regulatory issues at the airport. For example, the runway rehabilitation cargo facility. I should say the runway rehabilitation is largely already underway because it benefited from a $40 million investment by the Caribbean Development Bank. And obviously that was again, a vital thing that had to be done early in the life of this administration. Mr. Speaker, would you believe that when we inherited the reins of administration, when we inherited the reins of this administration, sir, of government, we had an airport runway at Grantley Adams International Airport. And there are several taxiways, but the plane got to land on a runway. Yeah? That runway, Mr. Speaker, sir, had a life of 15 years. It had exceeded its life by 3 years at the point when we inherited Grantley Adams International Airport. And I say that, sir, just to reflect again, because we don't live in this hammock of convenience. We have to understand, sir, that people can't have to stop now in Barbados wishing away the past. We have to stop wishing away the past and pretending as though it did not exist. Let us not get so consumed about the fact that the first 6 months, the first year, the first 2 years went so well that you judge this government as though it was a government of gods and goddesses as opposed to a government of men and women. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, we came in and had to source $40 million from the Caribbean Development Bank because of the fact that our runway had urgently to be addressed after it had outlived its useful life by 3 years. Again, Mr. Speaker, sir, I go back to the fact that obviously that is a priority, the ability for us to deal with logistics, cargo, et cetera, and that would be the second area of prioritized revenue generation. And then the final one is that there would be some desirables, which everybody likes to talk about because these things sound fancy. My own personal view, for example, with regard to the jet bridges, is that they are an investment that should pay for itself over time because of the fact that it makes accessibility to this island and in this island something that we can sell the island on. And I make the point again that the largest cadre of travelers around the world are those persons who are persons with disabilities. And that may not only be induced by virtue of their physical challenge, but a challenge brought on, sir, by advancing years. But these people travel, and I don't want to get into that debate at this point. I want to say, though, but things like jet bridges and so on are those desirables, but they're not necessarily revenue earning, and therefore they fall at the third tier of those 3 tiers of projected spend as we go forward. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, the piece of legislation that we speak to at Clause 8A, 5A, also helps us in the area of operational continuity. Because every contract to which Gaia Inc. is a party shall from the date of transfer be construed as if the license operator had been the contracting party. So that wherever there is a contract today at which Gaia Inc. is a party, then automatically once we have identified and put in place the license operator, that license operator takes over as though he had been there from the beginning. Equally, any debts or claims between Gaia and any third party are construed immediately as a debt or claim involving the license operator, whether it is against the license operator or for the license operator against somebody else. So that that is the operational continuity that is built into it. And again, Mr. Speaker, sir, because I have been here long and I understand the rhythm of this House, and I'm very sensitive to the concerns of the country, any person employed by Grantley Adams International Airport immediately before the date of transfer shall be an officer or employee of the license operator on terms and conditions which are no less favorable than those on which he was employed immediately before the transfer to the license operator. On terms and conditions no less favorable. And, Mr. Speaker, for the purposes of his employment calculation, period of his employment calculation, the license operator, if you began with Gaia and you're transferred over to the license operator, it is treated as one continuous single period of employment. So that, again, clear effort has been made to preserve not only employment, but preserve the terms and conditions of employment, even as we create a brand new space and a brand new environment for there to be refurbishment, much needed, expansion, much needed, creation of new entrepreneurial and business opportunity, much needed, better national security considerations, better facilitation, Mr. Speaker, sir, of fundamental service level requirements, and obviously equally, Mr. Speaker, sir, the way in which we treat to the accessibility of all and sundry to the airport. I think, Mr. Speaker, sir, that this is a matter that is of extreme importance to the country because, as I said, it would perhaps be the easiest thing in the world to be succumbing to the temptation that it is too tall an ask that with all that COVID has done for us, done against us, and done to us, let's kick this can down the road. We ain't ready for that day now. But the truth of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, yet again, this government is coming to the people of Barbados and to this House to say to the people of Barbados, we are investing in you. We believe deeply that this country can recover and will recover. We believe in its competitiveness and its talent, and that we have to unleash that talent and that competitiveness. But we have to put the necessary infrastructure in place to give our people that entrepreneurial opportunity and give our country that competitive advantage. Without this piece of legislation, sir, we are not able to do it at Grantley Adams International Airport. The COVID period would pass, people would get their vaccines, they start to travel again, and they would come to the same place that they had been coming to for years. And when once, if the projections are correct, we come to 2023 or 2024 and we return to a stage where we have 70,000 people arriving in a month, Mr. Speaker, sir, we would be no better off and in no position to adequately deal with them. Our experience, the experience in Barbados would have been perhaps worse and less competitive than elsewhere because, sir, we would have failed when we had the opportunity to make hay while the sun shines and get ahead of those people we have to compete against. We say no to that. We say that we've got to do this now. We've got to dig deep. We've got to try to find a way to make that bad situation we inherited a little better. In the same way that we said when we came to government, and one of the first things we had to do was deal with the financial situation facing the country. At the same time, we had to find $40 million in order to make that airport runway feasible. Otherwise, you would be hearing, well, we can't land in Barbados because there is a risk. That's what we have, that is the hand we have been dealt. And I'm not being tongue-in-cheek when I continue to say, sir, it is not any longer an opportunity for people to talk as though the rubber is not now meeting the road. We are at the midterm of the life of a government, and it is now time for us to be hearing where it is that you would be going if it is that you can only find fault. How would you deal with these situations if it was your hand to play? Mr. Speaker, it is all too easy to look at the finest castle built by the finest of craftsmen and say, I ain't like that piece of mortar there. If it was me, I didn't put that there. The reality is, sir, that we've got to go a little bit further than that if we're talking seriously about the governance of a country and the well-being of generations to come. And I am suggesting to you, Mr. Speaker, sir, that this particular piece of legislation is a signal to the country of our seriousness about this matter and investment in the future. I am obliged to you, sir. I beg to move that this bill be now read a second time.
You want to speak? Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Speaker. I would concede from here that that was a very good speech, a very good presentation offered by the Honourable Member for St. James, the now Honourable Member for St. James Central, because he set the bill in the context of his discourse as part of a government mechanism to take Barbados out, away from and beyond the point at which we have now arrived by, according to him, circumstances contrived by his predecessor, or predecessors, their predecessors, circumstances brought about by the impact, negatively so, of COVID on the Barbados economy, And so he indicated that the piece of legislation that we're debating today constitutes part of government's vision as to how we get out of the mess in which we now find ourselves and how we advance and go forward and deliver growth in the Barbados economy. He set the operations at the Gradley Adams Airport as a centerpiece of that, as a prime piece of that architecture going forward that would give us some growth. Talked about creating a competitive advantage so that businesses around, within and around, and emanating from the airport's operations would thrive, that Barbados as an economy would be able to successfully match what we offer against the best of what the rest of the region and the world offer. Talked about entrepreneurial opportunity for many as we develop the operations at the Grantley Adams Airport. So, by and large, a very good presentation, a very good speech. What surprised me is that it came from him, Mr. Speaker. Well, I hear somebody calling on the Lord already. What surprised me, Mr. Speaker, is that it came from him. Because this very same member, not too long ago in your very honorable house, Mr. Speaker, said that there's no government in the world at this time concerned with growth. And certainly the Barbados government is in no way concerned with growth. Growth initiatives, growth policies are not a priority for us.
Mr. Speaker, sir.
Honourable point of order, sir.
On a point of order, sir, the honourable member is misleading the House. I certainly can recall at no time that I said that.
Continue, Honourable Leader Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, he may not recall it, but I certainly do. It pained me.
On a point of order, sir. The honourable member,
Yes, he
I want to
did.
be very clear. The honourable
did.
member is misleading the House. I never said that on the floor of this House. Now, let it not be a matter of recollection, because that is a matter of convenience. It wasn't said by me.
I remember, I do believe, both honourable members, I do believe that is why we have Hansard. I do believe that the Hansard would then point clearly to whether or not it was said, if it was said, and when it was said.
That is absolutely correct, Mr. Speaker, and the honorable member can check it, and you can check it if you so desire. But I insist, this honorable member who last spoke said that governments are not at this time concerned about growth and growth policy. It is not a priority. It has never left my memory. It pained me then, personally. It pained me
On a
for...
point of order, sir. And it pains me now, the honourable member is paining me. I raised on a point of order because the member continues to mislead the House. And again, if he feels that there's merit in what he's saying, put up or shut up. Get the answer and tell me where it was said. Well, Mr. Speaker, sir, I will have to, every time he says it, I will be forced to say I never said it because I never said it.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition, could you, no, Honourable Leader, I'm just posing a question to you. Can you speak to any specificity in relation to when it was said to us to get the matter clarified, sir?
I cannot, on my feet at this moment, speak with specificity to the date and the debate, but I insist, Mr. Speaker, and the records can be checked. It was not very long ago. The pain for me was personal. When he said it, I was shocked. I felt the pain of the...
On a point of order, sir, the honourable member can find 100 ways to say the same thing, and I will have to say the same thing, and we will go nowhere. My position, sir, is that I'm on a point of order, and I'm asking for the honourable member to withdraw that which he has said. He is misleading the House. Quite frankly, sir, if the honourable member has a speech, it might be useful for him to give the speech without relying so heavily on what he alleges was said at a date he cannot recall and in a way he cannot recall. All he recalls is pain.
Honourable Member, Honourable Leader Opposition, listen. It would be best to,
He's going to be embarrassed.
Honourable Leader Opposition, it's best to move on because in order for there to be the point made, it would be important for this House to see when it was made, etc. So I would suggest that let us move on, sir.
And I will move on with your guidance, Mr. Speaker, and the records can be checked. I was simply trying to say, I felt the pain when it was said, personally, and I felt the pain on behalf of the all member for St. Michael South Central, because she has repeatedly in this House put the case that government is strong on growth and growth policies. And I'm sure she was shocked to hear that honourable member make that statement. But I move on.
Move on.
At your guidance.
Yes.
I move on at your guidance.
But Mr. Speaker, sir, I am on a point of order because while he's moved on, he's already said for I think maybe the fourth time that I have said that which I have not said. I don't mind him moving on. I'm happy to hear him move on, but I also do not want him to leave in his wake a falsehood.
Honourable, unless this.
Yeah,
this
Mr. Speaker, and I'm wanting...
Honourable Leader Opposition, unless these facts can be gleaned, please let us move on.
And I am
Please,
endeavoring
let
to
us-
move on, Mr. Speaker, as your member of St. James Central.
Because this point cannot be clarified at this point in time simply because you cannot say with any degree of specificity when it was said so that it cannot be said.
She would have noted
So,
it and said it.
Honourable Leader, please listen. Please
I'm
listen.
listening, sir.
So that it cannot be said that that was made unless you can point to when it was made, etc.
And Mr.
Otherwise, it is. Honourable, please listen. Honourable Leader, please listen. At this point in time, it can only be said that it is conjecture because it cannot be proved. Unless it can be proved, then it is right.
Mr. Speaker, I hear you and hear you very clearly. And if the House believes, and you as the presiding officer believes it's conjecture, then let it be listed as conjecture. But I know what I heard, and I'm moving on.
Thank you.
I know what I heard, and I am moving on. So I am surprised that the speech, though a good one, came from those honourable lips, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Again, Mr. Speaker, sir, I don't know.
Honourable.
Again, Mr. Speaker,
Honourable member for
I raise on a point of
for
order, sir,
St.
because the
James Central.
honourable member, if he is going to abide by your ruling, must abide. He cannot have it. He cannot have it both ways. He can't say he's abiding and moving on, and then, sir, impute the same thing that he has been told to move on about.
That will be struck from the record.
God bless you, sir. God bless you.
That you made this speech in this House because it cannot be, there's no degree of clarity in relation to when it was said.
And I hear you on that, Mr. Speaker. What cannot be struck from the record is the record that is already established by Hansard with reference to what he did say.
It depends on what he did say. Honorably, the opposition depends on what he did say. As I said, you cannot speak with any degree of certainty what was said when it was said. Kindly move on, Honorably, the opposition.
I have been endeavoring to move on for the last 10 minutes, Mr. Speaker. All right. So, beyond the surprise that escaped the lips of the Honourable Minister, there were some things which were worthy of consideration. I believe when it comes to the issue of private investment with respect to the Grantley Adams Airport, the question is not if private investment is necessary or desirable. Yes, of course it is. That is the way of the world now. That indeed is the way of the region now. And there are some very highly successful examples of those who have undertaken privatization with respect to the airports particularly so, And the success stories are multiple. And the Honourable Member, St. James Central, did refer to one or two of them. The question is not whether or not we embrace the notion of private investment in the operations and the development of our airport facility. The question is how and to what extent and with whom do we do so. Despite all that was said, one still gets a sense that there is a level of ad hocism, a sense of unclear vision with respect to the development trajectory of the airport facility. One still gets a sense that we are largely, as a people, as a government, still reactive in how we treat to our issues. And if you understand the measure of what the Honourable Minister said in his presentation, he did illustrate by reference to the number of predicted passengers traveling through the airport on one given day, and the fact that we had facilities developed to accommodate that level of capacity and movement traffic. But we were actually and in reality experiencing far higher volumes. And therefore we had to respond to that. And too often I believe that when we go into developmental projects, too often I believe that when we go into the kind of expansion initiatives and policies which will help us to be better accommodating of the activities in which we are engaged and from which we expect to earn, we are behind the eighth ball. We are playing catch up all of the time. We seem very seldom to be ahead of the game, and we have to play a game of catch up. And in everything he said, though there were good things, one still gets a sense that there is the element of unclear vision, a developmental vision which is not properly conceptualized, expansion initiatives, developmental initiatives, which constitute part of the ad hoc response, the reactive response to the realities which have descended upon us. All I'm saying here is, with all of that, is we have got to develop in keeping with the rest of the world and in keeping with trends, in keeping with the projections on traffic movement of travelers. We have got to engage ourselves in exercises that make our facilities ready for that type of traffic and which put us in a better position to compete with the rest of the region and with the rest of the world. So the question is not whether private investment, I'm saying. The question is to what extent, in what areas, and with whom, and what is the framework we put in place that will help us to achieve those goals. Now, I have to ask, and certainly that would be one of the questions I would imagine would come to one's mind. How does the development projected for the Barbados, the Gradley Adams International Airport fit with the overall development plans for the country? That is crucial. We are in an economy which is driven by tourism. Tourism as an industry, a sector largely dependent upon port facilities. In this case, we're talking airport. But that tourism development or the development of that sector impacts upon almost every other sector of life in Barbados. It is the prime prop upon which our economy is founded. So therefore, if you're looking for developmental trust in the tourism sector, one has to have a clear understanding, in my view, as to what are the impediments created by the now facilities situation at the airport. In other words, what is the issue that we want to address? What are the impediments that counter or work against our developmental vision for the tourism sector? And how do those impediments manifest themselves at the Gradley Adams Airport? And how do the plans we seek to put in place help us to address the removal of those impediments so that the tourism sector can fully play its part in carrying the Barbados economy forward? And as we seek that general economic development, national economic development, how does the developments around the operations at the airport fit into that larger development plan? One might say that's a whole set of words and it says nothing. But I well recall there was a lot of talk around the development of the ABC Highway, because there was a vision reposed in the bosom of some that suggested that the Barbados economy going forward needed to have the facility of an ABC highway. In fact, beyond the measure to which it now exists. There were severe criticisms of that vision, that conceptualization of that development. There were severe criticisms and questions such that the actual development of the highway was restricted to some extent. The question one has to face today is, did Barbados not have the ABC highway today? What would become of this country and what would become of this economy? I'm simply trying to be illustrative here, Mr. Speaker, and to say that when we get into major development projects and policies, they have to fit properly within the context of the broader National Development Trust. And therefore, what are we doing at the airport that conduces to a better situation for us with respect to our national development goals? Are you lost? So I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you for your approval. Yeah. Now, there's not only Central Bank faced the same storm of criticism. Central Bank was a pivotal entity now within the economic architecture, institutional architecture, policy architecture of the Barbados of today. This government has suggested very strongly to us that as part of its development trust, for instance, Mr. Speaker, there will be some infrastructural development taking place along parts of the South Coast and the West Coast and in and around the Bridgetown coastal area. That, to me, is fraught with all kinds of challenges. I've said from the beginning, will continue to say so until I can see clear concepts as to what is proposed and how those things will impact and improve positively the now situation. But the point is, if you are going to have major development initiatives, they have to fit with your larger national development landscape. I have a fear that much of what is being suggested with reference to the development of that marine and coastal area around Bridgetown, Lower St. James, and Lower Christchurch will present a lot of challenges for the Barbados that we know now, and for various reasons. And I just mentioned that in passing today. I'm trying to reinforce the point that we need to be clear as to what we want to do, as to what we seek to do at the Grantley Adams International Airport, and that whatever the plan is and whatever the policy is, it fits very neatly and properly within the overall national development goals for Barbados. I heard, for instance, the minister suggest that projections on visitor traffic for Barbados are such going forward that he is anticipating that there will be, 7,000 hotel rooms in anticipation of the kind of movement implied by the volume of traffic projected, the numbers projected. Now, he spoke only with respect to hotel rooms, Mr. Speaker, but he specifically referred to hotel rooms. He made no reference to the villa situation, and I am not expert in the tourism industry sector, but I am of the view and of the opinion that the development of the capacity within the villa sector is such that it is now actually competing with the traditional hotel room sector. And therefore, whereas in this minister's mind, the capacity is to be found in the building out of more hotels and more hotel rooms, perhaps the reality is that the capacity is to be realized in the further development of the villa market in Barbados. All I'm saying is, whatever we plan, whatever we conceptualize, whatever we dream of or wish for, must fit within that broader national development agenda. A government must obviously seek some level of input from privatization. You have a high debt liability situation in Barbados, and in most cases in the tourism sector, in the development of port facilities around the region, around the world, one of the things that drives that type of policy position is the high debt profile of the respective countries. We have a high debt and high debt liability profile. The minister told us nothing with respect to the operational expenditure attaching to the now operations at the Grantley Adams International Airport. Did not tell us what level or percentage of that, or what is the level of or percentage of that expenditure in relation to the revenue generated by the airport, whether it is the non-aeronautical revenue of which she spoke, or the aeronautical revenue with which we are familiar. But there's no indication. I know he cannot tell us everything in one speech. I repeat, it was a good speech, surprisingly from him. But he never did give us an indication as to the percentage of operational expenditure vis-a-vis the revenue now generated from the operations at the airport. So the context I'm speaking of is a context in which Barbados is faced with high debt and growing debt and committing itself to more and more debt. And we have to find the growth successes that will help us going down the road generationally to repay this debt. But at the same time, we need to reckon with where we are at this moment and to see what is the relationship between the debt at the now airport situation and the revenues being generated, because that constitutes part of context out of which we seek to operate. Of course, there's a need for improved quality of services, increased range of services at the Adams Airport, and he spoke to some of the limitations and to some of the missed opportunities which the status quo situation presents for us. We would want to see at our premier port of entry the kind of services and quality of services that afford our visitors and travelers out of here the best of airport experiences. We look around the Caribbean, in my view, in the bigger countries, perhaps Barbados in terms of the services, even when compared to some of the smaller economies in the Caribbean, the services offered to and available, offered from or offered in and available at our airport facilities are inferior, and that is a fact. And the now situation does not offer the best possible experience to visitors and travelers. And if privatization can help us to better address that in a situation where the state is constrained fiscally, then one understands the move to privatization. Of course, there's a need for more effective marketing and branding. And we have seen instances in dealing with private entities where that objective has been better achieved than through the normal, perhaps state-operated, state-related, or publicly funded avenues. So branding is important, market is important. There's nothing about that for me that is incidental or accidental. Can't rest on your laurels, to use the phrase that the minister used, but we have to be proactive, and privatization helps us with that too. We are not far removed from the fiasco of the slogan, what is it, brother? The recent slogan, whatever it was, the fiasco, we're not far removed from that. And that whole controversy, that whole fiasco, that effort in bungling by that entity only goes to show there's so great an importance attaching to advertising properly, marketing properly, and branding yourself, your jurisdiction properly. You've got to get it right. And a government must look for the expertise that can get us there, not pay $500,000 or $750,000 for people to give us repeat, overused slogans that get us nowhere, that we have to shelf before we can put them out there. And this is important. We deal with private elements in this. Private elements get it wrong too. And there was some involvement of private elements in that whole fiasco. But we would want to get past that and know that we have a facility that can be properly branded and marketed and shown to the world, that puts us successfully in competition with regional neighbors, with other regional port facilities, and with international facilities and jurisdictions as well. There's tremendous growth in air traffic, and the Honourable Minister made some reference to that. From my own research, I learned some of that. The globally, 4.5% increase annually in tourism traffic and visitor movement over the next decade. And I don't know that in Barbados we have arrived at a projection as to what is likely to be the case over the next 10 years. And I would not want to think that we are engaging in the type of policy decisioning that is nearsighted, is that the right term? And that does not take us beyond the next couple of years. Now, I know that we're talking about contracts for operations in the management of airport facility that would take us 30 years. And that is a number which I hope is a studied point of reference and not just a number drawn from the experience of somebody else somewhere, whether it's Jamaica or elsewhere. And then we go for 30-year periods of contracts. We know what we're doing, and that is a particular dynamic or specific which is relevant to Barbados. Now, we can pull things out of the air, or we can take the studied approach. And obviously, movement in visitor traffic over the next 10, 15, 20 years is projected to be significant. And I don't know that we want to 5 years from now come back to the House and say to the House, what we have done only accommodates X amount, and we did not anticipate Y amount of persons coming. And therefore, careful study must be put into these things. I heard no reference to any such projections for Barbados, just a reference to what is happening globally, which is fine. But we need to know where we, as a people, are going. The management contracts go for 9 years. I think I read that the average of a management contract is 9 or 10 years, but I suppose that depends upon what is the actual specificity attaching to the management contract. Here we're talking of longer terms, and therefore I presume we're going beyond simply management of internal airport operations, and we're actually going into the management of infrastructural and developmental operations around the Gradley Adams Airport to make it a better facility. Now, the question that arose in my mind was, what is the level of government investment which might be occasioned even when we move to adopt the privatization approach of some elements of the operation? Is there any element of complementary investment that the state will have to find and input to get us where we want to be? Those questions are relevant when Barbados struggles to find the pockets and the capacity in its pockets to do what needs to be done. Therefore, I raise that not simply because I want to use words. If we are going to privatize operations in any of our port facilities and award contracts to companies, what level of complementary investment input is expected of government, and can we afford that? Now, the Honourable Minister was very clear to state there's no intention to privatize the airport. He repeated it, and he repeated it, and repeated it. And I acknowledge that he repeated it because it is one of the questions that I had. And I would not be the type of person to stand here to suggest that there's any intention on the part of government to privatize the airport. But I would have raised the question as to whether or not there's any such intention. But he has made it clear that that is not the intention of this government, and I accept that. But I know that the exigencies of time and the circumstances in which small developing economies now find themselves can bring complete about turns in policy. But we take him at his word that there's no attempt to privatize fully the airport. But when one thinks of our debt trajectory, when one thinks of our developmental, infrastructural projections going forward with reference to the airport and outside of the airport as well, other developmental infrastructural projects around Barbados, the question really will have to be asked as to whether government will be able to escape the need to privatize the airport. We have seen the day dawn in Barbados more than once when family silver had to be sold, when governments found themselves faced with such straitened circumstances that they sold the family treasure. And I take it at the word of the Honourable Member that there's no intention on the part of the government to fully privatize ownership of the airport, and we pray the day perhaps will not dawn that that has to be. But infrastructure development, capital infrastructure development, very costly, and governments such as ours are very constrained fiscally, and these create issues. Now, I would not be true to myself if I did not sit down and raise the issue of private terminal facilities at the Grantley Adams Airport now in existence, and to ask a question as to how we would have arrived at the awarding of the privilege of owning or managing private terminal facilities at the Grantley Adams Airport. This has been shrouded in a little bit of, I don't want to say mystery or secrecy, but certainly unclarity. And there have been questions raised, and perhaps this debate would provide the opportunity for the principal spokesman on this matter to speak to that in clear terms as to what is the nature of the operation, what is the basis upon which the privilege of operating such a facility would have been awarded, and was there any competitive bids for such privilege, and if not, why not, etc., etc., etc. I was glad to hear the minister speak to the matter of staff and the arrangements contemplated with respect to the welfare, well-being of staff, even in the face of private management of some operations at the airport. That is important. We have seen before where ownership or management has changed and the welfare of existing staff and workers not necessarily constituting a priority, and there has been injury to persons who have made their cries loud in this society, in this country, as to what has befallen them negatively when a change in management, a change in ownership, a change in control has taken place. I take again the minister at his word, the assurance given that any changes in operational management will not result in injury or detriment to workers. And I hope that that is a position that can be maintained, because we know how investors can be. They feel that money is might, and that small economies like us, especially in these times, are desperate for capital injections, and are therefore willing to change our policy or to turn a blind eye or to turn our backs upon workers when they're faced with some of these challenges. Recently, some of the people out of the Harrison Cave operation approached me specifically on this matter, because they were severed with the new arrangements at Harrison's Cave, movement from caves of Barbados to Chukka, and they were severed. And the complaint which they brought to me is that no severance has been received. Now, this unfortunately is a repeated story we're hearing across Barbados, and one would want to get to the bottom of that as to who's responsible for payment of severance is the caves of Barbados, and if so, where is that matter in terms of it being worked out in the interests of the workers. Now, that is one example I cite with reference to that cave, but it can happen, and it's happened, and I'm happy to hear the minister suggest that with reference to airport operations staff need not worry, because the regimes which are to be actualized and activated with reference to operations under private management at the airport will be such that workers' rights will be preserved and be protected. Minister did make a very valid point in suggesting that some would think that now in this dark COVID period, with the economic darkness that we have come through thus far, would want to suggest that now is not the best time to be thinking of moving out and moving ahead and moving forward and giving actualization to some of your proposals and policies and plans. But that this government is not daunted by the now circumstances and looks to see how it can best pursue policy in the interest of Barbadians. And therefore, now is a good time to prepare ourselves for when tourism is fully opened up again and the opportunities there are available to us. Now is a good time to get things ready and prepared for that. Now, I heard that story with respect to the whole management of the hotel sector in relation to tourism industry. Government set aside hundreds of millions of dollars to help the sector be prepared for that day when we can reopen to the world and receive tourists coming again in great numbers. Now is the time to make sure that plant is re-energized and that plant is improved and that infrastructural development can take place, and government was willing to assist with that effort. It's fine. It's fine. Fine objective. Now, you know, this operation of the cave up at Harrison, that was awarded to Chukka out of Jamaica. It's been quite some time now, and I know people offer the view that tourists haven't been coming, so the cave has been closed. Well, that's understandable. The cave is closed, tourists haven't been coming. But I do not know that any one single thing has been done to improve the plant and the facility during this downtime. I don't know a single thing has been done to improve the plant and facility during this downtime. And as far as I'm aware, that cave is soon to reopen, offering the same old stale, tired product that it offered when it closed. And all I'm saying is, when private operators come in, they say all kinds of things, but they find the smallest, the slightest of reasons to renege from their arrangements, their agreements, and to do what works for them best. Now, I would hope that we would carefully study and address the issue of particular risks associated with privatization at a facility like an airport. There are regulatory risks, there are security risks, as the minister said. We would expect the private the private interest, the private entity to undertake the commercial risk. But there are other risks to which country is exposed when you're dealing with a facility such as an airport. And I would want to know that there's a strong risk management framework in place to address these issues. And what are the reserved or the retained rights by government, even though the operations are turned over to private interests? And what is the potential loss vis-a-vis public control of the facility? In treating to airlines, we have had the experience and know the reality. Airlines coming into Barbados and committing to coming here have been facilitated by arrangements with the government in past times, and I presume now as well, and that they come here based on undertaking given by our government, that we give them minimum revenue guarantees in relation to a potential load factor. And always these types of arrangements are attached to agreements when you get involved with private sector partnerships as a public or state entity. And I didn't hear anything said to us of any commitment on the part of government, any minimum guarantees on the part of government that we are providing for these private operators who will be managing Grantley Adams Airport. Well, if there's none, you should say that. There's none else I can ask. And people, if there's none, I'm glad to hear there's none. But you should say so, because people will raise those questions. And I have to raise them in order to be told by the Prime Minister that they're not so. So I'm glad to hear that there is nothing so. So we got to be careful that we are not taken advantage of by private people seeking only capital gains. What are the metrics to be used with respect to the improvements in facilities and efficiency and quality of service? What are the metrics to be employed by the government? A private entity may have its own goals. A private entity may have its own aspirations, may have its own plans and projections. But this government must ensure that there are some metrics available to it to monitor and measure efficiency gains and quality of service under new operational management at the airport. Does the Barbados Airport now have a current service rating? I do not know that I have heard any mention of that. Is there a service rating that attaches to the operation of the Barbados airport at this time? And under private management, what is the anticipated service rating that we will achieve?
Right. On a point of elucidation, Mr. Speaker, sir.
Honourable St. James Central.
Yes, I only raise on a point of elucidation, Mr. Speaker, sir, to perhaps make clear that which I thought I had already said. We do not have those ratings at the airport, have never had them, but the time has come for them to be in place, and the intention is to deal with those matters by way of the service level contracts, which will specifically then align services to the international best practices. So whatever the studied international best practices are, wherever they are to be found, whether it be customs performance, immigration, port health, plant, and I can't remember what the other department is called. What we will be doing is to align that level of service with what the best practices are internationally.
Continue, Honourable.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the Honourable Minister and member for that, and I apologize if I hadn't heard the mention of it earlier, but I certainly is an important thing, and I hope that as we go forward it will be pursued and become a reality. And then what are the likely implications for user fees and user charges at the airport when we privatize aspects of its management? We have seen, again, when private hands, the private hands of capital are brought to bear on situations, services may improve, yeah, but user fees, user charges also improve. What are the implications there for Barbadians, especially using the airport facility? The last thing, and perhaps that on which I will close, and I join with the minister in this because I had it noted here as well. And the efficiency, what I call efficiency complementarities around the management of the airport operation. By that I mean, you can have a private entity managing your airport, but there are also state-related entities operating in that environment. He mentioned, rightly so, customs, immigration, port health, and even those who are engaged in baggage handling. You have to have a certain level of complementarity of these services to match any achieved greater excellence in service provided by management on the private operation, private interest. And you cannot have immigration that is too slow, on demand. You can't have customs that is too slow, on demand, irregular in attendance, that type of thing. So that's extremely important. And therefore, there perhaps will be a cost to the state to match the kind of service efficiency gains that private interest management might bring. And at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, all I'm saying is it's not a question of whether or not we privatize certain elements of the operations at the airport. That's the world in which we live, the constraint context that we suffer under. It's a question of what type of arrangements do we make and with whom, and how do we manage and monitor those as a state responsible to the people of Barbados for the assets of Barbados. So thank you. Oh man, my back.
Essential. Honourable Member Christchurch, Essential.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My contribution will be brief, as this really is an important piece of legislation to facilitate Barbados along the path of transformation. And you would recall, sir, that very early on, this administration, as pointed out by the Honourable Member for St. James Central, that we are on a mission of transformation, sir. And to the extent that the transformation is matched with not just growth, but development, as well as inclusion, sir, with respect to ordinary citizens, that this was an area that we felt was important to be able to match that which we know international expertise can bring and incorporate, sir, all the elements of Barbadian expertise as well as enterprise to be able to ensure that the growth that we had anticipated, sir, coming out of 10 years of little or no attention being paid strategically to these areas, that we could foster a new dawn for Barbadians. And very quickly, sir, we moved through a series of interventions, certainly at the airport, to facilitate the introduction of the kiosk, sir. And if I was a believer in conspiracy theory, sir, I would think that COVID-19, sir, was somehow conspired to throw Barbados off track. Because you will recall, sir, that we introduced a number of measures, certainly in the context of the airport. First and foremost, sir, to take the BTMI off of the government's budget. We also, sir, sought the introduction of a new set of reforms for immigration through the introduction of the kiosk. The Customs Department, sir, was modernizing its operations at the airport, sir, all during 2018 and 2019, sir, in an effort really to try to, in the shortest possible time, the mission clearly was to double the throughput of the airport in the shortest possible time. So when I heard the Honourable Leader of the Opposition indicate or try to assert that the government had no growth strategy, it is extraordinary, because this is one of the very areas that we felt certainly would contribute to growth coming out of a decade where there was little or no real growth in the economy, but certainly to build out a space and a framework that would see the inclusion or greater inclusion of Barbadians in the process, whilst obviously the investments are being led in the context of the PPP by a private operator. I heard the Honourable member for St. Michael West, the Leader of the Opposition, sir, made quite a number of references to privatization, and I want to repeat for the benefit of the Chamber that which the Honourable member for St. James Central indicated very forcefully during his presentation, that the government of Barbados is not in any way privatizing the airport. It is not selling the airport, sir. We are seeking to have a strategic engagement to be able to unlock investment, because coming out of 10 years of little or no growth, the high debt that had faced this country, we recognized that we needed to do things differently in order to transform Barbados to become a world-class country, society, economy, sir, in 7 years, and therefore we felt that this was a strategic alignment to be able to undertake. The reality, sir, is COVID-19 came along, and the airport experience has been perhaps one of the most extraordinary, because whilst we have spoken, and I've heard a number of people indicate that we should diversify and do this and do the next and do the third, sir, the reality is that there's a whole set of activity that is triggered once an aircraft lands at the airport. And before, I know that we all see tourism as tourists coming from overseas and lying on our beaches and going to our hotels. But there's a whole range of activities that take place at the airport alone, sir, before anything, before a dollar is really spent in the economy, that is instructive, because the airport today, by way of activity as outlined by the Honourable member for St. James Central, certainly pales in comparison, because the COVID-19 pandemic, sir, has been the greatest disruptor of logistics, sir, globally. The airport or the seaport for that matter, but the airport in this case, sir, is one of the most logistically challenging spaces in Barbados. And we were on a path, sir, with immigration, with customs, with all the other regulatory agencies at the airport, sir, to improve and shorten the time frame within which we got certainly subject to any security issues, sir, to move the traffic through as quickly as possible. And we have now come to a point where now, sir, with the introduction of COVID, to see that certainly with testing and verification and validation of all of these things, sir, that the things that we were working so hard to improve now, we are almost back to square one, because certainly, sir, the health and safety, not just of the workers at the airport, but certainly the rest of Barbados, in the context of us trying to get as many people vaccinated as possible, that length of time now at the airport and the experience now is very different from what we had initially contemplated when we charted this path in order to go down this road. And therefore, it is instructive, sir, that as the Honourable member indicated, what is to take place when you travel internationally now by way of not just the quarantine, but certainly, as you know, sir, as travel has started to resume, that with the protocols in place, the experience at airports globally in terms of transit times certainly will likely be extended. But we have tried our best, certainly here in Barbados, to ensure that that experience is as smooth as possible. And we will continue to set that bar very high to ensure that the welcome to Barbados is as warm as it can be, notwithstanding the fact that we have a new challenge in the name of COVID to be able to manage. But the airport, sir, is that space that ordinary Barbadians, as they travel and return to this country, in a very short time, the year and a half that we had that prior to the onset of COVID, Barbadians experienced and saw the improvements in the processes that we had introduced. And it is unfortunate that COVID has interrupted that, because we certainly want to test certainly the protocols, but testing the protocols and the new interventions are meant you needed traffic to truly understand where the bottlenecks really are. And as we go back to hopefully with greater vaccination globally, and we get back to a level of traffic that would allow for the, not just the business case, but for the regulatory agencies like Customs and Immigration to better improve their services, sir, then I know that we have been working to be able to sort some of those issues out, but it requires numbers, sir, to truly understand the movement of people, to ensure that the regulatory concerns or security concerns are met, and that the investment that the government of Barbados certainly has made by way of the introduction of whether it's scanners and the other infrastructure in place to get a better assessment as to what we have put in place, that would require greater numbers. And I hope, sir, that we can have the resumption of travel to the levels that predate certainly 2019 as quickly as possible, because I can tell you, sir, that it has been no extraordinary feat to try to respond to the fact that having put a number of early reforms in place to raise money, sir, to be able to help finance BTMI and the other operations of the country, that the reality is that the airport, certainly as all airports globally have had to experience, is that with the literal stoppage of international travel has meant that all of these institutions have had a very difficult time, simply because an airport opens specifically to move people. And if people aren't going to and fro, then the airport in of itself as a business certainly will not be making money. This is a global phenomenon. And therefore it requires all of us to do that which we know that we can contribute to bringing back a level of activity, which means certainly the following of the protocols, the need for us to be vaccinated so that we can move people safely. Now, from an economic perspective, sir, we have already seen the economy in the last year decline by almost 20%, sir, because of the absence of that movement of people. And that is something that obviously from a financial perspective, not just in the context of the airport, but we felt it not certainly with the red caps, sir, who move people's bags, which is perhaps, I think we're the only airport in the region, I speak subject to correction, that actually has persons who actually move baggage for persons. And certainly it's part of the welcoming experience. But if you think of the red caps, sir, in the last year, red caps would have struggled. And these are ordinary Barbadians who make a living, providing that unique service, which is not found anywhere in the Caribbean. And therefore, their families obviously would have been impacted by the lack of movement of people and the numbers. And when the Honourable Minister spoke about the level, the 95% reduction in travel, I mean, these are catastrophic numbers, sir, in the context of what it means for ordinary Barbadians to support their families on a day-to-day basis. And this government will continue, sir, to work with not just the private sector, but with all of the stakeholders to ensure that we can bring a respectable level of activity back safely, sir, to ensure that those workers can support themselves and their families, and that they can have a measure of pride and less stress, sir, going forward. But equally, sir, important to the transformation of Barbados. And then you have the taxi drivers, sir, the people, the airport taxi operators, sir, all of the businesses at the airport, the logistics people, sir. So if you think about the catering companies and stuff in terms of air travel, there's a significant amount of activity, sir, in the context of the airport that for the last year has quite frankly been absent. And therefore, all of the persons who would ordinarily contribute to that activity certainly would have seen a fall off in terms of the economic, in terms of the profits, and certainly the services that would have been provided. And that is what has contributed, sir, not just as it relates to hotels, but certainly a range of other logistical partners who would have felt the brunt with respect to the fall off of traffic as it relates to the airport. We wish COVID did not come along, because we know that we would have concluded this arrangement already, and we would have been on a different path with respect to being able to facilitate the process, because the confidence that we had started to engender, sir, in the recovery effort for the broader macroeconomy, the confidence is still there. But we can't shy away from the fact that COVID-19, a global pandemic, has disrupted a process that we had planned so delicately for, and we had intended that certainly by now that Barbadians would have been able to start to see, in a real sense, some of these new activities, which we knew, sir, will help provide a trigger for further onward investment in the economy, given the restructuring that we had undertaken early on in the first 18 months. And this bill, sir, I fully support. It will set the underlying framework, sir, to allow us to be able to facilitate the agreement once concluded. And the important bit, sir, is for Barbadians to recognize that notwithstanding the challenge of COVID-19, sir, that this government will continue to focus on ensuring that we can build out a certain degree of investment capacity, which will expand opportunities, sir, for Barbadians, and that the more persons that we can get going through, not just the airport, but certainly coming through the rest of the economy, sir, in the shortest possible time, that would mean that ordinary citizens participating in the economy will be able to benefit from that. And whilst we have seen in the short term the cessation of travel as it relates to COVID, our intention is to ensure that once we can get back to normality, normality is not to mean or to be interpreted, sir, as the same size as the way we were. The intention has always been, sir, to expand such that we get more participation so that the growth is as inclusive as possible, to allow Barbadians really to benefit from that which any private investor from any part of the world will come and enjoy, and that we bring as many Barbadians along as possible. So I truly support this bill, sir, and I urge Barbadians to, at the appropriate time, to certainly engage in whatever consultations will be forthcoming, to get a better understand what opportunities will exist for you and to participate in, and certainly don't allow anybody to dissuade you from not participating at the detriment of yourselves and certainly any business opportunity that you will see coming on stream. Because it is at this stage, sir, that I urge Barbadians to be very, 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 very mindful that the path that we have set this country on, COVID notwithstanding, sir, is still the right path to be able to ensure that we can deliver a better life for all of our people, but certainly to provide real economic opportunity and to actually create, sir, create wealth that can be passed on from one generation to another. And therefore it is important that as many persons can regularize themselves as possible, because in this COVID environment, we've already seen the government try to reach out to as many stakeholders as possible, but it's important that as we build these new opportunities, that people get themselves regularized in order to be able to participate fully, such that we can build as much resilience within the context of the economy. And certainly nobody foresaw, sir, the total cessation of travel, which is something that was completely unforeseen, never contemplated, sir, in any of our planning at all, because as I said, when we came into office, the reforms that we put in terms of the airport development duty, in terms of being able to finance, all of the things, sir, that we did essentially was to help insulate some of the very institutions that we have had to give support to in the last year, simply because, as the minister said, the operating model changed drastically, and therefore we had to respond as a government. And therefore, Barbadians must take comfort that, notwithstanding the challenge, this government has responded to be able to keep not just the airport, but certainly the workers at the airport fully engaged in a very extraordinary set of circumstances financially. And we will continue to do so as we re-engage the international community with the resumption of travel, with the appropriate protocols in place to allow for not just the airport to recover, but certainly the businesses that operate within the airport space, sir, all of the duty-free shops, all of the taxi operators, sir, even the food concessionaires at the airport, sir, as I said, the red caps, and the whole host of other of entities involved in the process, because we know that once we can improve and increase the numbers that are flowing through the airport, then we know that Barbados will be on a path to recovery. And therefore, sir, with those few words, I am obliged to you. Thank you.
Honourable Member from James Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable members of the House who have participated in this debate. Obviously, I would want to thank first the member for Christchurch East Central, who just took his seat, and thank him for directing the attention of the Chamber to some of the key developments undertaken independently of the government very early in the life of our administration, and key developments undertaken independently of the need for us to go into this public-private partnership agreement undertaken very early in the life of this administration, but with a view to advancing the well-being of all those persons who had to do business at the airport, and equally those persons who were passengers at the airport. The example that he points to is a very important one, the introduction of the so-called e-gates, or the kiosks, which allowed for us for the first time in history to make the immigration process a lot more seamless. And I well recall long hours that he and I, and at that time the Minister of Immigration, your member for St. James North, would have spent at the airport, as the Prime Minister would say, with our sleeves rolled up, making sure that the processes were properly implemented. Equally, Mr. Speaker, sir, taking the Barbados Tourism Marketing Incorporated off the statute books. And again, you know, we forget very quickly, there was a period of time, maybe 2 or 3 years prior to the life of this administration, that it was a common thing for there to be a requirement or a call on the public purse for the marketing of Barbados of $100 million. In the month of March, when I last would have presented estimates to this House for the Ministry of International Transport and Tourism, Mr. Speaker, sir, we did so at a sum of money that was less than $9 million. Effectively taking $91 or so million off of the backs of the people of Barbados in order to make sure that the country was able to market itself, but without having to have that ongoing burden being experienced. And equally, Mr. Speaker, sir, the impact on the average person who either works at the airport or has to do business there. I thank the honourable member for elaborating on that matter. The only other honourable member who spoke in this debate, sir, is the Leader of the Opposition. And I already have thanked him for his input. I strained, Mr. Speaker, sir, to be able to clearly assist the House in my own understanding of that which the honourable member did say. As he spoke, the old Nat King Cole song came to mind, Rambling Rose, why you ramble no one knows. But the honourable member took us on a tour, sir, even though we were speaking about the airport specifically, along the ABC Highway, visiting the Central Bank, and made one or two other stops by way of capital projects, so-called. I don't want to say, Mr. Speaker, sir, that I thought that he went outside the bounds of relevance, because that would be to reflect on your management of the process, sir, and I would not do that. But he did, sir, spend some time on one issue which I think does warrant.
I remember it would be wise of you not to.
No, I wouldn't do that, sir. I wouldn't do that. And he did, sir, spend some time on one issue which does actually warrant a measure of reflection. And that is when he addressed the matters at Harrison's Cave. Now, obviously not directly arising out of this particular bill before the House, they do speak to the broader issue of tourism in Barbados. And I want to assure both the Honourable Leader of the Opposition and the persons who are within earshot of my voice in Cathedra and ex-Cathedra, the House, that there is a set of circumstances raised by the Honourable Member that we are conscious of and that we feel there needs to be clarity on. The staff at Caves of Barbados, sir, were officially severed on the 31st of October 2020. They were officially severed on the 31st of October 2020. All members of staff have been paid their severance. There's one set of circumstances where there's a person who was certified to be medically unfit. I believe the date of that certification was the 30th of October in the year 2020. That person was retired under special conditions given their circumstances. There are 3 members of staff who did not qualify for severance due to the length of their service. And therefore, obviously, if you fall outside of the specific time of service required and set down by the laws of Barbados, and you do not you do not meet that length of service threshold, then you can't be severed via that process. Mr. Speaker, sir, the severance payments bill for the Caves of Barbados is $2,411,409. $2,411,409. And as I said, all those who qualify for severance have been paid. And you add in vacation pay and other considerations of that nature, the Caves have paid out $3,044,628 to its employees. At present, sir, there is a skeleton staff employed at the Cave, persons taken from accounts, the accounts department, admin, and the operations persons who are on short-term contract, and their purpose for being there is to make sure that there's a smooth and efficient transition to the new operators. I think those were the issues that were raised by way of concern from the Leader of the Opposition, and I would not want it to be said that we did not hear those things that were logical and that made good sense and try to connect therewith. I unfortunately, sir, am not in a position to speak much more substantially to the speech of the Honourable Member because it bedeviled me and challenged me in many ways in terms of comprehension. But Mr. Speaker, sir, I have tried my best in the circumstances to be responsive to him. I again want to say to the House, Mr. Speaker, that I am obliged for their patience, I am obliged for their participation, and I now wish to move that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that the aforementioned bill be read a second time. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. Honourable member, continue. Continue, sir.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to move that you now vacate the chair and that the House go into committee, standing committee.
The question that the Speaker do now leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
This house is not in committee.
Clause 1.
Madam Chair, I wish to move that, I beg to move that clause 1 stand part.
Question is that clause 1 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 2 stand part.
Question is that clause 2 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 3 stand part.
Question is that clause 3 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 4.
I beg to move that clause 4 stand part.
Question is that clause 4 stand part. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Report.
Ma'am, I beg to move that you report the passage of one bill in committee.
Question is that I do not report to His Honour the Speaker the passing of one bill in committee. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of committee is reporting the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to move that the bill be read a third time.
Question is that the aforementioned bill be read a third time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I beg to move that the bill do not pass and be cited as the Grantley Adams International Airport Transfer of Management and Vesting of Assets Act, Cap 286,
2021.
2021.
Question is that the aforementioned bill be passed and so cited. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is passed and so cited. Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that, we have come to the end of today's sitting. I beg to move, therefore, that the sitting be adjourned until the 22nd of June at 10 a.m.
I deal with that. The question is that this House be adjourned until Tuesday, the 22nd day of June at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands adjourned until Tuesday, the 22nd day of June at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.